The November fog of 1895 had settled upon London with particular malevolence, transforming the familiar streets into a labyrinth of grey shadows and muffled sounds. From our comfortable lodgings at 221B Baker Street, the world beyond our windows appeared as little more than ghostly suggestions of movement in the occasional amber glow of a gas lamp struggling against the murk. It was on such an evening, when the very air seemed to press against the window panes with damp insistence, that Inspector Lestrade arrived at our door bearing news of a mystery that would test even my friend Sherlock Holmes' remarkable powers of deduction. I had been absorbed in the evening papers, noting with interest the theatrical reviews that praised the recent performances at the Imperial Theatre, when the familiar sound of hurried footsteps upon our 17 stairs announced an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Hudson's voice carried up from below, followed by Lestrade's distinctive tread and the rustle of his waterproof coat as he shed the evening's moisture in our hallway. Holmes, who had been reclining in his chair with his eyes closed in that peculiar state of contemplation I had learned to recognize as intense mental activity, opened his grey eyes with the sudden alertness of a cat detecting movement in tall grass. "Ah, Lestrade," he said before our visitor had even crossed the threshold, "your haste suggests either a crime of unusual complexity or a superior who has threatened your position. Given the theatrical playbills protruding from your coat pocket and the faint scent of grease paint about your person, I deduce the former, and that it involves the stage." Lestrade paused in the doorway, his small weathered face bearing that expression of resigned amazement that Holmes's observations invariably produced. "Sometimes, Mr. Holmes, I wonder if you don't have spies positioned throughout London for the sole purpose of making me appear the fool." "Merely observation, my dear fellow," Holmes replied, gesturing toward the chair opposite his own. "The playbills, the paint, and your obvious agitation tell their own story. Pray, take a seat and enlighten us as to what impossible crime has driven you from your warm office into this wretched weather." Lestrade settled himself with the air of a man bearing news too strange for comfortable belief. "It concerns the Imperial Theatre, Mr. Holmes, and an incident that has left half of London's theatrical community in a state of near panic. You may have read of Miss Marple in the papers, a singer of considerable reputation who has recently taken London by storm with her performances." "Indeed, I recalled the name." Miss Marple had been featured prominently in the society pages, not merely for her extraordinary voice, but for her striking beauty and the mysterious circumstances of her rise to fame. She had appeared seemingly from nowhere 6 months prior, captivating audiences with performances that critics described as otherworldly in their emotional power. "Last evening," Lestrade continued, "Miss Marple was performing the lead role in a new production titled The Captive Star. The climax of the performance featured her wearing the famous Tregarron sapphire, a stone of exceptional size and value, lent for the occasion by Lord Tregarron himself for charitable purposes. The gem was to be displayed under the full glare of the limelight during the final aria, creating what the theatre manager described as a moment of transcendent beauty." Holmes leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I sense we are approaching the crux of your mystery, Inspector." "Indeed we are, Mr. Holmes. At the moment of highest drama, with a packed house watching and Lord Tregarron himself present in the royal box, the impossible occurred. As Miss Marple lifted the pendant containing the sapphire toward the blazing limelight, the stone simply shattered. Not cracked, not chipped, but exploded into 1,000 glittering fragments that scattered across the stage like fallen stars. I could not suppress an exclamation of disbelief. "But surely, Lestrade, that's impossible. Sapphires are among the hardest substances known to man. The heat of a limelight, however intense, could never cause such destruction." "Precisely what makes this case so confounding, Doctor," Lestrade replied grimly. "Yet I have the testimony of over 800 witnesses, including some of London's most prominent citizens. They all saw the same thing, a priceless sapphire reduced to dust in an instant, and Miss Marple collapsing in apparent shock, her hands bleeding from the fragments. Holmes rose from his chair with that sudden energy that always signaled his complete engagement with a problem. "The lady's injuries, you examined them personally?" "I did. Small cuts across her palms and fingers, consistent with grasping something that had suddenly become sharp-edged. The theater physician attended to her immediately. Most curious was the residue left on her gloves, a fine blue powder that seemed to shimmer in the light. And the stone itself? You recovered the fragments?" Lestrade produced a small cloth bag from his coat. "What we could gather from the stage. The theatre manager, Mr. Silas Venn, insisted we collect every particle. Lord Tregorin was beside himself. The sapphire was valued at over £10,000 and had been in his family for generations." Holmes accepted the bag and examined its contents with his magnifying glass, his brow furrowing as he studied the glittering dust. "Most intriguing. The fragments show no signs of heat damage, yet they are far too uniform in size to have resulted from any natural fracturing. Tell me, Inspector, who had access to the stone between its authentication and the performance?" "That's where the mystery deepens, Mr. Holmes. The sapphire was examined and certified genuine by Mr. Cornelius Blackwood, London's most respected gemologist, at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. From that moment until the performance, it remained in the custody of Miss Marple's dresser, a woman named Sarah Whitmore, who swears she never let it leave her sight. The only persons who handled it were Miss Marple herself and Mr. Venn, who adjusted the setting to ensure it would catch the light properly. Yet somehow, Holmes mused, between authentication and performance, a genuine sapphire worth £10,000 was replaced with something that could be destroyed by theatrical lighting. The question, my dear Lestrade, is not how this was accomplished, but why someone would go to such elaborate lengths to create so public a spectacle." The inspector shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "There's more, Mr. Holmes. Miss Marple has disappeared." This revelation struck the room like a physical blow. Holmes's eyes sharpened to points of steel, and I felt my own pulse quicken with the implications. "Disappeared?" Holmes repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous quiet. "When? How?" "Some time during the night. After the incident, she was taken to her dressing room to recover. The physician gave her a mild sedative, and her dresser remained with her until she appeared to be sleeping peacefully. This morning, the room was found empty, the window open, and no trace of the lady to be found. Her personal effects remain untouched, but she has vanished as completely as if she had never existed." Holmes began to pace before the fireplace, his lean form cutting sharp silhouettes against the dancing flames. A theatrical performance, a priceless gem destroyed before hundreds of witnesses, and the principal actress vanished without trace. Either we are dealing with the most elaborate confidence scheme in London's history, or— He paused, turning to face us with that peculiar smile that indicated his mind had already begun to penetrate the mystery's heart. "Or we are confronting something far more sinister than mere theft." "You'll take the case, then?" Lestrade asked, hope evident in his voice. "Indeed I shall," Holmes replied, already reaching for his coat. "Watson, I trust you'll accompany me to the Imperial Theatre. I have a feeling that Miss Marple's shattered star will prove to be merely the first movement in a much more complex composition." As we prepared to venture into the fog-shrouded streets, I could not shake the feeling that we were embarking upon one of our most challenging investigations. The image of a sapphire exploding into stardust haunted my imagination, while questions multiplied like shadows in the gaslight. Who was Miss Iris Marple, really? What force could destroy a sapphire so completely? And what had become of the mysterious woman who had held a star and watched it crumble to nothing in her hands? The game, as Holmes would say, was most decidedly afoot. The November fog seemed to part reluctantly before our hansom as we made our way through the labyrinthine streets toward the Imperial Theatre. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, occasionally examining the blue fragments through his magnifying glass, while I found myself studying the peculiar way our cabman navigated the treacherous roads with unusual care, as if protecting something precious from the jolting cobblestones. "Observe our driver, Watson," Holmes murmured suddenly, his voice barely audible above the clip-clop of hooves. "Note the tremor in his left hand and the faint aroma of expensive Turkish tobacco that clings to him. The fresh scuff marks on his boot-instep suggest recent work requiring precision and delicacy. Here is a man of finer trades fallen upon harder times, yet still maintaining the careful habits of his former craft." Before I could respond, our destination loomed before us through the swirling mist. The Imperial Theatre stood like a monument to Victorian grandeur, its elaborate facade emerging from the fog with cathedral-like solemnity. Even in the grey morning light, the building commanded respect, its ornate stonework and gilded details speaking of an age when theatrical entertainment was considered among the highest forms of art. The stage door admitted us immediately upon Lestrade's identification, and we found ourselves in a world unto itself. Narrow corridors branched off like arteries from the main backstage area, while the distinctive scent of grease paint, old wood, and theatrical mustiness enveloped us. Gas fixtures provided pools of warm light, but shadows gathered in the corners with almost deliberate persistence. Mr. Silas Venn awaited us in the wings, a man of middle years whose well-tailored clothes showed signs of recent stress. His hands trembled slightly as he greeted us, and his voice carried the trained projection of someone accustomed to addressing audiences. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his words echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "I cannot express my gratitude that you have agreed to investigate this impossible occurrence. The reputation of the Imperial hangs in the balance." Holmes wasted no time with pleasantries. "I should like to examine the stage immediately, Mr. Venn. Has anything been disturbed since the incident?" "Nothing whatsoever. I gave strict instructions that everything remain exactly as it was." The stage stretched before us in magnificent desolation, the empty auditorium rising in tiers of red velvet and gold. The elaborate medieval set dominated the space, complete with painted stone walls and hanging tapestries. Holmes moved immediately to the spot where Miss Marple had stood, marked now by a glittering circle of sapphire fragments scattered across the boards. He knelt and examined the debris with his magnifying glass, occasionally selecting pieces with his tweezers. "Mr. Venn, the limelight was focused precisely here during the performance. Indeed, our lighting master, Mr. Aldrich, had perfected the effect from his station in the flies above." Holmes's eyes followed the indicated direction to a narrow platform visible among the ropes and pulleys. "I shall need to speak with him. But first, tell me about the stone's mounting." The original setting was quite old and loose. I had our property master, Mr. Grimsby, create a more secure mounting barely an hour before the performance. "Barely an hour," Holmes repeated thoughtfully. He moved to examine the nearest limelight apparatus, testing its heat output and studying the spent lime cylinder with intense concentration. "Have this lit, if you please." When the brilliant beam sprang forth, Holmes placed his glove in its path. The leather warmed but showed no signs of damage that could account for a sapphire's destruction. From her workbox, Sarah Whitmore, the dresser summoned by Venn, produced the empty star setting. Holmes accepted it with keen interest, turning the ornate piece between his fingers and bringing it to his ear, as if listening for secrets. A faint click rewarded his attention. With a pin borrowed from Miss Whitmore's sleeve, he touched a nearly invisible point on the setting's rim. A tiny panel sprang back, revealing a hollow cavity smeared with blue residue. "Extraordinary," I breathed, while Miss Whitmore stared in amazement. "It has never done that before," she gasped. Holmes smiled grimly, closing the compartment with practiced ease. Yet someone knew of its existence and made use of it. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, who handled the stone between Mr. Blackwood's authentication and the performance? Only myself, Mr. Venn, Mr. Grimsby when he adjusted the setting, and Miss Marple for the final fitting. And now, Holmes said, pocketing several of the larger fragments, let us examine Miss Marple's dressing room. The scene of her mysterious disappearance may yet yield the key to this elaborate deception. Miss Marple's dressing room lay at the end of a narrow corridor lined with faded theatrical posters from seasons past. The door bore a simple brass nameplate, and as Mr. Venn produced his master key, I noticed Holmes examining the lock mechanism with particular attention to the keyhole's edges and surrounding woodwork. "No signs of forcing," he murmured, running his finger along the door frame. "Whatever transpired here was accomplished with either great skill or willing cooperation." The room itself spoke of temporary occupancy rather than settled habitation. Personal effects remained scattered across the dressing table with what appeared to be casual disorder, yet something in their arrangement struck me as oddly deliberate, as though each item had been carefully positioned to suggest normalcy while concealing deeper truths. Holmes moved immediately to the open window, his keen eyes taking in every detail of the sill and frame. The November air drifted in with its burden of fog and coal smoke, stirring the curtains in ghostly animation. Below, a narrow alley stretched between the theater and the adjacent building, its cobblestones glistening with accumulated moisture. "A drop of perhaps 15 feet, he observed, leaning out to examine the wall beneath. "Manageable for someone of athletic disposition, though hardly comfortable in evening dress." His fingers traced along the window frame, pausing at several points where the paint showed fresh scratches. "Rope marks, Watson. Someone descended from this window with considerable care and preparation." Miss Whitmore wrung her hands anxiously beside us. "I cannot understand it, Mr. Holmes. When I left her, Miss Marple was sleeping peacefully. The physician had assured me the sedative would keep her comfortable through the night." "What exactly did Dr. Pemberton administer?" Holmes inquired, turning from the window to examine the wash basin where a small medicine glass still held traces of amber liquid. "Laudanum, sir. A mild dose to calm her nerves after the shock of the incident." Holmes lifted the glass to his nose, inhaling carefully. His expression grew thoughtful as he detected something beyond the expected bitter almond scent. "Curious. There are additional compounds present here. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, how long has Dr. Pemberton been attending the performers at this theater?" "Only since Miss Marple joined our company, sir. He came highly recommended by Lord Tregorin himself, who insisted we engage Dr. Pemberton for any medical needs that might arise." Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with me. The web of connections was beginning to reveal its intricate pattern, though the full design remained tantalizingly obscured. He moved to the dressing table, examining each item with methodical precision, his trained eye catching details that would escape ordinary observation. "Mr. Venn," Holmes said quietly, "I should like to speak with your property master, Mr. Grimsby, immediately." The modification of the star setting was accomplished with remarkable timing and precision. We found Grimsby in his workshop beneath the stage, a cramped space filled with the accumulated treasures and theatrical detritus of countless productions. The man himself proved to be a wizened craftsman of perhaps 60 years, his fingers stained with the patina of decades spent working with metals and precious materials. "You'll be wanting to know about the star setting," he said before introductions could be made, his sharp eyes immediately focusing on Holmes with the intelligence of someone accustomed to working with precision and discretion. "Indeed, you modified the original mounting yesterday afternoon." "Aye, but only as instructed by Mr. Venn. Said the old setting was too loose, might drop the stone during the performance. Simple enough work, just tightening the prongs and adding security." Holmes examined the tools scattered across Grimsby's workbench, noting the fine metal shavings that clung to several implements. "These filings produce a distinctive blue-green residue. What metal creates such coloration?" The craftsman examined the residue with professional interest. That'll be copper with traces of tin, sir. Bronze work, by the appearance, though I cannot recall working any bronze yesterday afternoon. Most illuminating, Holmes murmured, his eyes taking on that peculiar gleam that indicated pieces of the puzzle falling into their proper places. Tell me, Mr. Grimsby, in your 40 years of theatre work, have you ever encountered a star setting with a hidden compartment? The property master's weathered face creased with genuine confusion. Hidden compartment? I saw nothing of the sort, sir. The piece was straightforward enough, though the metalwork was finer than most stage jewelry. As we prepared to leave the workshop, Holmes paused, his attention caught by something glinting in the shadows among the theatrical props. Mr. Venn, it appears your theatre holds more secrets than even you suspected. But the true question remains. Who knew of their existence, and why did they choose last night to reveal their hand so dramatically? The game was growing more complex with each revelation, and I sensed we had barely begun to unravel the elaborate deception that had been played out before 800 unsuspecting witnesses. The glinting object that had captured Holmes's attention proved to be a fragment no larger than a fingernail, curved and razor-thin, with an ethereal blue tint that seemed to emanate from within rather than rest upon its surface. He lifted it delicately with his tweezers, and when he pressed it gently between his fingers, it yielded with the faintest crackle, crumbling to fine powder that caught the gaslight like scattered stardust. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, collecting the dust on a sheet of black paper. "Not crystalline fracture, but the collapse of something far more fragile. This is no fragment of corundum, but rather the shell of an elaborate deception. Glass, I venture, blown thin and tinted with remarkable skill to simulate the internal fire of a genuine sapphire." Mr. Grimsby examined the powder with professional interest, his weathered fingers testing its texture. "Aye, that's glass dust right enough. But I've never seen work so fine. Would take a master craftsman to create something that delicate." Holmes pocketed the evidence with characteristic precision. "Indeed. And now, gentlemen, I believe we must consult with Mr. Blackwood immediately. If a substitution occurred between authentication and performance, his expertise may illuminate the precise nature of this deception." Our journey to Hatton Garden took us through streets where the fog had begun its reluctant retreat, revealing the bustling commerce of London's jewellery quarter. Mr. Cornelius Blackwood received us in his examination room, a chamber that spoke of decades devoted to the study of precious stones. His response to our inquiry was immediate and emphatic. "The stone I authenticated yesterday afternoon was genuine beyond question, Mr. Holmes. I stake my professional reputation upon it. The Tregarin sapphire possessed every characteristic of authentic corundum, including internal rutile needles in a distinctive star pattern and microscopic fluid inclusions that develop only under specific geological conditions." Holmes presented one of the larger fragments for examination. After several minutes beneath Blackwood's most powerful microscope, the gemologist straightened with an expression of profound bewilderment. "Extraordinary. This fragment shows none of the internal structure I observed yesterday. The crystal formation is entirely artificial, yet the surface characteristics were perfect. I have never encountered such sophisticated forgery." "Which confirms," Holmes observed, "that a substitution of remarkable audacity occurred between your certification and the performance. The timing would be crucial, requiring not only access, but intimate knowledge of the stone's specific characteristics." Upon our return to Baker Street, we found Inspector Lestrade awaiting us with barely contained excitement. "We have our man, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Pemberton, the physician who attended Miss Marple. It turns out he was struck off the medical register 5 years ago for fraudulent practices involving the substitution of valuable medicines. He's been gambling heavily, accumulating considerable debts." Lestrade warmed to his theory with obvious satisfaction. "The public destruction creates the perfect distraction while the real gem disappears." Pemberton had access to Miss Marple's room, could have administered a stronger sedative than claimed, then helped her escape through the window with a genuine sapphire. His background in chemistry would explain the explosive device that destroyed the imitation. And Miss Marple herself, I inquired. His accomplice, no doubt. The whole collapse was theatrical performance, designed to provide cover for their escape with the real stone. I found myself nodding at the inspector's reasoning. The pieces seemed to align with satisfying precision, creating a portrait of desperate criminals executing an elaborate deception. Holmes, however, remained silent, his grey eyes fixed upon the dancing flames in our hearth. When he finally spoke, his voice carried that peculiar quality that indicated deep reservation. "It is indeed an elegant solution, Lestrade, accounting for nearly every observed fact." Nearly. He rose and moved to the window, where the fog still clung to the rooftops like guilty secrets. Yet it is precisely this neatness that gives me pause. The bronze filings in Grimsby's workshop, the specific compounds in the sedative, the theatrical timing of every element. It is almost as if this entire scenario were constructed to lead us directly to Dr. Pemberton. But who else could orchestrate such complexity? Lestrade protested. Holmes turned from the window, his expression grave. "That, my dear Inspector, is precisely what we must discover, for I suspect we are, dealing not with desperate criminals, but with a mind of extraordinary cunning, one that has anticipated our every deduction and prepared accordingly." The room fell silent as Holmes concluded his analysis, the weight of his observations settling upon us like the evening fog that pressed against our windows. Lestrade shifted uncomfortably, his confidence in the Pemberton solution visibly wavering under the relentless logic of my friend's deductions. "But surely, Mr. Holmes," the inspector protested, "the man's desperation provides ample motive, and his chemical knowledge explains the method. Are we to ignore such compelling evidence merely because the solution appears too neat?" Holmes moved to his chemical bench, selecting a small vial containing traces of the blue powder we had collected. "Consider, Lestrade, the bronze filings discovered in Grimsby's workshop. The property master explicitly stated he had not worked with bronze yesterday afternoon, yet the filings were present and of a specific composition consistent with the residue found within the star setting's hidden compartment. If Dr. Pemberton were responsible for both the substitution and the modification of the setting, why would he leave such a distinct trace in Grimsby's domain? Perhaps he used the tools without understanding their previous applications, I suggested, though even as I spoke, the explanation felt inadequate. "A possibility, Watson, but consider also the compounds I detected in Miss Marple's sedative. A man of Dr. Pemberton's chemical knowledge would surely administer a straightforward narcotic if his intent were merely to ensure deep sleep for an accomplice's escape. Yet the substances present would induce not profound slumber, but rather a state of heightened suggestibility and vivid, disorienting awareness." The implications struck me with sudden clarity. "You mean she might have been conscious during her disappearance, but made to believe she was dreaming?" "Precisely. Such a compound would be known only to a very select few, requiring almost artistic precision in its application. It suggests not the desperate fumbling of a cornered man, but the calculated work of someone far more sophisticated." Lestrade grudgingly nodded his understanding. "Very well, Mr. Holmes. I'll maintain surveillance on Dr. Pemberton, but postpone any arrest. How long do you require?" "Until tomorrow evening, Inspector. I believe our true adversary will reveal themselves before then, for this entire elaborate performance was designed not merely to steal a gem, but to accomplish something far more complex." After Lestrade's departure, Holmes immediately penned 3 urgent telegrams. As he sealed the final envelope, our landlady announced an unexpected visitor whose arrival would transform our understanding of the entire affair. Lord Tregarron entered our sitting room bearing little resemblance to the composed aristocrat one might expect. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of considerable strain, his silver hair disheveled and his hands trembling with barely controlled emotion. "Mr. Holmes," he began without preamble, "I fear I have not been entirely forthcoming about the circumstances surrounding my sapphire. The truth is far more complex than I initially revealed." Holmes gestured toward our most comfortable chair, his keen eyes already cataloguing the subtle signs of distress that marked our visitor's demeanor. "Please, Lord Tregoran, speak freely. I have long suspected that your sapphire held significance beyond its monetary value." The nobleman settled himself with visible effort, his weathered fingers working nervously at his walking-stick's silver head. "The stone has been in my family for 3 generations, Mr. Holmes, originally part of the crown jewels of Burma, seized during the Third Burmese War and subsequently gifted to my grandfather for his service to the Empire." "And Miss Marple's connection to this history?" Holmes inquired with gentle persistence. Lord Tregaran's composure cracked visibly. "She is my granddaughter, Mr. Holmes, the daughter of my son Edgar, who died in India 15 years ago, along with his Burmese wife. I've been searching for Iris since childhood, when she disappeared from the mission school where I had placed her for her education." This revelation struck the room like a physical blow, reshaping every assumption we had formed about the case. Holmes leaned forward, his gray eyes sharp with renewed interest. "You recognized her when she appeared on the London stage?" "Immediately. She possesses her grandmother's extraordinary beauty and her father's musical gifts. But when I approached her after a performance 6 months ago, she claimed no knowledge of our family connection, insisting her name was truly Iris Marple and that she had no living relatives." Holmes rose and began his familiar pacing, his mind clearly working through the implications. "Hence your arrangement for Dr. Pemberton to attend the theater's medical needs, hoping proximity might gradually restore her memories or provide opportunities to demonstrate your genuine concern." "Exactly. But now I fear someone else has discovered our connection and is manipulating these circumstances for purposes I cannot fathom. The question, Mr. Holmes, is whether my granddaughter's memory loss is genuine or whether she is being used as an unwitting pawn in a game whose true objective remains hidden." As Lord Tregaran departed into the foggy night, I found myself contemplating the extraordinary transformation our case had undergone, realizing we were dealing not with simple theft, but with a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of family secrets and imperial history. The morning brought responses to Holmes's urgent telegrams, each carrying information that would fundamentally alter our understanding of the case. The first arrived with our breakfast, delivered by a telegraph boy whose haste suggested the sender's urgency matched our own growing sense that time was becoming a crucial factor in our investigation. Holmes read the messages with increasing satisfaction, his gray eyes brightening as connections previously hidden began to emerge with crystalline clarity. "Watson, my inquiry to the India office has yielded extraordinary results. Captain Edgar Tregaran's death was far from the straightforward military casualty his father believes. The captain was investigating systematic irregularities in the colonial administration's handling of confiscated Burmese treasures, including sophisticated forgeries being substituted for genuine artifacts before official cataloging. The implications struck me immediately. His daughter would have inherited not only musical gifts, but potentially dangerous knowledge about these irregularities." "Precisely. The second telegram confirms Dr. Pemberton's expertise extends far beyond conventional medicine into the realm of Burmese ceremonial compounds capable of inducing profound memory alterations. But most significantly," Holmes continued, producing the third message, "my theatrical agency contacts reveal that Miss Iris Marple's entire stage history is an elaborate fiction. The touring company that provided her references never existed." Holmes rose and moved to his chemical bench, where he had been analyzing the blue fragments throughout the night. "Observe, Watson. These powder samples show traces of copper salts and shellac, a tinted shell blown thin as tissue and designed to collapse under specific conditions. No explosion occurred, merely the predetermined failure of an exquisitely crafted deception. Our return to the Imperial Theatre revealed unusual morning activity, with several well-dressed individuals moving purposefully through the stage door. Mr. Venn greeted us with barely concealed agitation that immediately put Holmes on alert. "Mr. Holmes, thank Providence you've returned. We've had the most extraordinary development. Miss Marple has been found." Holmes received this news with the calm of someone who had anticipated multiple possibilities. "Where, Mr. Venn, and under what circumstances?" "In her dressing room, sir, as if she had never departed. She claims complete amnesia regarding the past 2 days, insisting she merely fell asleep after the performance and has only now awakened. Dr. Pemberton is examining her at Lord Tregoran's request." Holmes's expression sharpened dangerously. "Dr. Pemberton is here. Most convenient." Before proceeding to the dressing room, Holmes insisted we examine the lighting platform in the flies above the stage. "Someone occupied this position during the performance who was not our honest lighting master," he observed, collecting traces of fine ash and a blue-green smear from the handrail. The same residue found within the star setting's hidden compartment. In Miss Marple's dressing room, we encountered a tableau that seemed almost deliberately arranged for our benefit. The young woman sat before her mirror, ethereally beautiful but profoundly disoriented, while Dr. Pemberton attended her with careful solicitude. Lord Tregoran stood nearby, his relief evident yet tinged with apprehension that suggested deeper concerns. "Miss Marple," Holmes said gently, "do you recall anything of the sapphire's destruction?" Her beautiful eyes showed no recognition. Only fragments like pieces of a dream. The blazing light, something crumbling in my hands, then darkness. "Your hands, Miss Marple. May I examine them?" She extended her hands with docile compliance, revealing palms that bore no trace of the cuts Lestrade had described. The skin was smooth and unmarked, as if the injuries had never occurred. "Most remarkable," Holmes murmured, though his tone suggested anything but admiration. "Dr. Pemberton, your therapeutic compounds appear to extend to areas far beyond conventional medicine." As we departed the theatre, Holmes's demeanor had transformed into that focused intensity that always preceded his most dramatic revelations. "Watson, we are not dealing with simple jewel theft, but with an elaborate conspiracy designed to manipulate Miss Marple's identity and discredit her connection to the Tregoran family. The public spectacle was never about stealing the sapphire. It was about creating doubt, about making her appear unreliable as a witness to whatever truths she might possess about her father's discoveries in Burma." The fog had begun to lift from London's streets, but I felt as though we were only now entering the darkest portion of our investigation, where the true adversary would soon be forced to reveal themselves completely. The afternoon light filtering through our Baker Street windows cast long shadows across Holmes's chemical apparatus as he continued his meticulous analysis of the evidence we had gathered. The blue fragments lay arranged in precise patterns on his bench, each piece telling its own story of sophisticated deception. I watched him work with that peculiar intensity that always preceded his most significant revelations, knowing that the scattered clues were finally beginning to form a coherent picture in his remarkable mind. "Watson," he began without lifting his eyes from the microscope, "observe the extraordinary precision with which these glass fragments were crafted. The internal structure has been chemically treated to mimic not merely the appearance of corundum, but its specific refractive properties. This is not the work of a desperate amateur, but of someone with intimate knowledge of both gemology and advanced chemistry." He straightened and moved to his desk, where he had arranged samples of the various residues we had collected. The bronze filings from Grimsby's workshop, the verdigris traces from the lighting platform, the copper salts embedded within the star setting's hidden compartment. Each element points to a single individual possessing extraordinary technical expertise across multiple disciplines. Our contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Blackwood, whose expression bore the gravity of someone carrying momentous news Mr. Holmes, my continued examination of the authentication records has yielded a discovery that transforms our entire understanding of this case. The sapphire I certified yesterday afternoon was itself a forgery, though one of such sophistication that it fooled even my most rigorous testing. Holmes received this revelation with the satisfaction of confirmed deduction. What led you to this realization, Mr. Blackwood? The fragments you provided contained synthetic rutile needles, arranged in patterns that replicate natural star formation, but lack the microscopic irregularities that develop over geological time. Only 3 individuals in London possessed the technical skill to create such perfect forgeries. 2 remain in my employ, but the 3rd disappeared from Hatton Garden 6 months ago. His name? Holmes inquired, though his tone suggested he had already reached his own conclusions. Marcus Ashford, formerly the most skilled gem cutter in the Empire. His specialty was creating insurance replicas so perfect they could substitute for originals during exhibitions. He vanished completely, taking with him detailed documentation of every significant stone he had examined, including comprehensive records of the Tregeran sapphire from work performed 5 years prior. Holmes began his familiar pacing, his grey eyes bright with the fire of complete understanding. Consider the timeline, Watson. Ashford disappears precisely when Miss Marple appears on the London stage. Someone with his expertise could have created multiple sophisticated replicas, each designed for specific purposes within an elaborate, long-term deception. But what could drive such an intricate conspiracy? I asked, struggling to comprehend the scope of what we were uncovering. Captain Edgar Tregeran's investigations into colonial treasure irregularities, Watson. His daughter represents not merely a family reunion, but a potential witness to systematic fraud involving Burmese artifacts. Someone with intimate knowledge of those irregularities required her discredited before she could recover memories that might prove inconvenient. Holmes moved to the window, his keen mind clearly working through the final connections. The sedative compounds Dr. Pemberton administered were designed not merely to induce amnesia, but to implant suggestions to make Miss Marple doubt her own perceptions and memories. Such specialized knowledge suggests coordination between Ashford's technical expertise and someone with access to obscure pharmacological practices. Then Dr. Pemberton is merely another pawn, I suggested. Indeed, his desperate circumstances made him susceptible to manipulation, but he lacks the comprehensive knowledge required to orchestrate such complexity. We are dealing with someone who has spent months, perhaps years, positioning each element of this deception with theatrical precision. Holmes returned to his chemical bench, selecting several vials containing the various residues we had collected. The bronze work required access to Grimsby's tools. The star-setting modification demanded intimate knowledge of its hidden mechanism, and the timing of every element suggests someone with unrestricted access to the theater's operations. Someone within the Imperial Theater itself. Someone whose position grants them complete freedom of movement, whose presence would never be questioned in any area of the building, and whose reputation places them above suspicion. Holmes's expression grew grimmer as the implications became clear. We are not dealing with external criminals, Watson, but with betrayal from within the very institution that should have protected Miss Marple. As evening approached, Holmes began preparing for what I sensed would be our final confrontation with this elaborate conspiracy. Tonight, Watson, we return to the Imperial Theater. But this time, we shall be setting our own stage, one designed to force our hidden adversary into the light, where justice can finally reach them. Holmes's preparations for our evening return to the Imperial Theater bore the precision of a master strategist arranging his final gambit. He spent considerable time at his chemical bench, preparing what appeared to be invisible marking compounds, while simultaneously studying detailed plans of the theater's layout that he had somehow procured during our investigation. "Watson," he said as he carefully sealed several small vials, "tonight we shall witness the final act of this elaborate drama. Our adversary has invested too much in this deception to abandon it now, particularly with Miss Marple's memories beginning to surface despite the chemical interference. They will be forced to complete their work, and in doing so, reveal themselves completely. He moved to his collection of theatrical accessories, applying subtle alterations to his appearance with the practiced skill of a seasoned performer. I have arranged for Inspector Lestrade to position his men at strategic points throughout the building, while Lord Tregoran and Miss Marple will remain safely distant until we signal the all clear. The evening fog had begun its retreat from London's streets, leaving the gaslight to cast sharp shadows as our hansom delivered us to the Imperial Theatre's stage door. Holmes had timed our arrival with characteristic precision, entering the building during the brief window when the night watchman made his rounds of the upper galleries. We proceeded immediately to the property workshop beneath the stage, where Holmes had prepared an observation post behind a collection of medieval shields and armor. From this vantage point, we could monitor the entire backstage area while remaining completely concealed. "The trap is set, Watson," Holmes whispered, producing a small device that appeared to be connected to the star setting above through an ingenious system of nearly invisible wires. "I have treated the hidden compartment's mechanism with a compound that will leave distinctive traces on anyone who manipulates it. Additionally, certain key areas have been dusted with substances that develop under heat and perspiration, creating a chemical signature that will persist for hours." We waited in tense silence as the theater's ancient timbers settled around us with their familiar creaks and whispers. At precisely 8:15, footsteps echoed through the corridors above, followed by voices speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Mr. Silas Venn appeared at the head of the stairs leading to the workshop, but his entire demeanor had transformed from the anxious theater manager we had previously encountered. Gone was the nervous trembling and theatrical projection, replaced by the focused intensity of someone executing a long-planned operation. He carried a leather satchel and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged completely in these spaces. Holmes gestured for absolute silence as Venn proceeded directly to Grimsby's workbench, where he began assembling what appeared to be another star setting from components concealed within his satchel. His movements displayed the practiced expertise of a master craftsman, each manipulation of the delicate mechanism performed with surgical precision. "The final substitution," Holmes breathed almost inaudibly. "He requires one more perfect replica to complete the deception." Dr. Pemberton emerged from the shadows, ascending the stairs with careful steps. His usual nervous demeanor had been replaced by cold calculation, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of its previous uncertainty. "The girl's resistance to the compounds is stronger than anticipated," he reported quietly to Venn. "Her memories of Burma are beginning to surface despite repeated treatments. The Colonial Office investigation could connect to the missing artifacts if she recovers full recall of her father's work." Venn paused in his intricate work, his fingers still manipulating the star setting's hidden mechanism. "Unacceptable. Captain Tregoran's investigations threatened 15 years of systematic substitution. His death in India was carefully arranged to appear accidental, and his daughter's convenient amnesia has provided temporary security. However, Lord Tregoran's recognition of her threatens our entire network." Holmes's eyes blazed with the fire of complete understanding as the conspiracy's true scope became apparent. This was not merely about a single sapphire, but about a vast operation that had been systematically looting colonial treasures and replacing them with sophisticated forgeries for over a decade. "The Tregoran sapphire was merely our latest acquisition," Venn continued, completing his work with a satisfied click as the hidden mechanism engaged. "But the public spectacle was necessary to discredit any future testimony she might provide. A woman who suffers dramatic collapse during a performance, who claims amnesia and displays erratic behavior, makes a most unreliable witness to colonial irregularities." Dr. Pemberton shifted nervously in the shadows. "The compounds I've been administering are reaching dangerous concentrations, much more, and we risk permanent brain damage or death." "Then we proceed to the final phase tonight," Venn declared, packing his tools with methodical efficiency. "Miss Marple will suffer a tragic accident during her recovery, overcome by delayed shock from the performance. Her death will end all questions about colonial irregularities while appearing completely natural to any investigation." Holmes rose silently from our concealment, his face bearing an expression of controlled fury that I had rarely witnessed. The time for observation had ended, and justice would now be served with the precision these criminals had applied to their elaborate deceptions. "Gentlemen," Holmes announced, stepping into the light with theatrical timing that would have impressed the most seasoned performer, "I believe your final performance has reached its conclusion." Both men froze, Venn's hands still gripping the completed star setting while Dr. Pemberton instinctively moved toward the stairs as if calculating his chances of escape. Holmes, however, had anticipated such reactions and produced a police whistle whose sharp blast immediately brought the sound of running footsteps from multiple directions. "Mr. Venn," Holmes continued with deadly calm, "or should I say, Mr. Marcus Ashford, master gem cutter and architect of the most sophisticated art forgery network in the Empire's history. Your theatrical management was merely the latest role in a career dedicated to systematic theft disguised as colonial administration." As Inspector Lestrade and his constables surrounded our cornered conspirators, Holmes began his methodical exposition of the evidence that had led us to this moment, each revelation falling into place with the satisfying precision of a master craftsman completing his greatest work. Venn's composure remained remarkably intact, even as the constables surrounded him, his theatrical training serving him well in this final performance. He regarded Holmes with the calculating intelligence of someone who had orchestrated deceptions across continents, as if still evaluating possibilities for escape or negotiation. "Your accusations are quite dramatic, Mr. Holmes," he said with practiced dignity, "but theatrics do not constitute proof admissible in any court of law." Holmes smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a chess master announcing checkmate. "Proof, you say? I prepared for this eventuality, Mr. Ashford." He moved to Grimsby's forge, where a small spirit lamp cast its flame beneath a metal dish. "You handled the star setting's hidden mechanism tonight, just as you have countless times before. I treated that mechanism with a compound that adheres to the natural oils in human skin and reveals itself when subjected to precise temperature." He gestured toward the warming dish, then to Venn's hands. "Inspector, if you would have Mr. Ashford extend his fingers toward the heated surface." Lestrade's men moved closer as Venn, with a theatrical shrug of resignation, held out his elegant hands. Holmes passed the warmed dish near them, and immediately a distinctive blue-green luminescence bloomed along the ridges of his fingertips, the chemical signature unmistakable in the gaslight. The same copper salt pattern we discovered within the star settings compartment and upon the lighting platform's rail. Holmes continued with methodical precision. "Your confidence in the invisibility of your methods proved your undoing. Bronze filings appeared on Grimsby's workbench where he swore none should exist. Verdigris traces marked areas where only you possessed unrestricted access, and that masterfully crafted glass shell was designed to fail under specific limelight conditions." Dr. Pemberton, whose face had turned an increasingly sickly pallor, seemed to deflate entirely under the weight of the evidence. His brief show of defiance evaporated as the full scope of their exposure became apparent. "You see, Doctor," Venn observed with bitter amusement, "even in defeat, he cannot resist demonstrating his cleverness." Holmes turned his penetrating gaze toward Pemberton. "Your expertise lay not in mechanical deception, but in chemical manipulation. The laudanum you administered to Miss Marple was adulterated with Burmese compounds specifically designed to erode confidence and implant false memories. Her supposed injuries from the shattered fragments vanished overnight because they never truly broke her skin, merely theatrical blood applied to treated gloves hours earlier. She was made to believe in the pain because the mind becomes remarkably obedient to such suggestions when properly conditioned. Pemberton's resolve crumbled completely. "I never intended permanent harm to come to the young woman," he stammered, his voice stripped of all pretense. "My instructions were merely to maintain her compliance, to keep her memories sufficiently confused until any official inquiries passed." "Instructions from whom?" Holmes prompted with deceptive gentleness. The doctor cast an agonized glance toward Venn, then at Lestrade's determined expression. Something fundamental within him surrendered. "From the theater manager, but he answers to others. Gentlemen with connections at the Colonial Office who required that Captain Tregarran's investigations remain permanently buried. Payments were delivered through an intermediary known to me only as H." Venn's carefully maintained control finally cracked, a flash of genuine fury lighting his eyes. "You weak fool," he hissed, making a sudden movement toward his leather satchel. Holmes reacted with equal swiftness, striking Venn's wrist and sending the satchel tumbling across the workshop floor. Papers scattered like autumn leaves, and I immediately moved to recover a detailed notebook whose precise columns recorded an astounding catalogue of colonial treasures. The ledger revealed dates, descriptions, and locations of crown reliquaries, temple jewels, and administrative seals, each entry linked to replacement protocols and custodian assignments. Against the Tregarran sapphire appeared the notation ALD, followed by platform. "Aldrich," Holmes declared immediately. "Your lighting master." He positioned the limelight at the precise angle, applied the treated compounds to create internal luminescence, and ensured sufficient heat to collapse the glass shell at the dramatic moment. Lestrade turned sharply to his constables. "Find Aldrich immediately." But their footsteps echoed through empty corridors. Venn's thin smile returned, dangerous and knowing. "You will not locate him within these walls, Mr. Holmes. He departed half an hour before your arrival. There are other tasks requiring completion." Holmes's expression sharpened with sudden understanding. "The final phase of your deception. Guard Miss Marple and Lord Tregarran immediately, Inspector. Double the watch at the townhouse. Aldrich cannot complete his work here now that we have exposed the operation, but he will attempt to stage the accident elsewhere, perhaps through a trusted servant or messenger." "I have constables posted already," Lestrade replied, dispatching a runner with urgent instructions. "But if this man possesses half the cunning you attribute to him, he may have prepared alternative approaches." Holmes crouched over the scattered ledger, turning pages with practiced efficiency. "Observe these entries, Watson. Each operation includes mechanical contingencies, secondary methods, should the primary approach be discovered. Here, recovery phase, lampman to retask at residence, lantern arrangement, vapor ignition by accidental spill. A domestic mishap designed to appear completely natural, explained by delayed shock from the theatrical incident." Pemberton trembled openly. I warned him repeatedly that the chemical compounds had reached dangerous concentrations. If the vapors take hold as planned, the result will be fatal. A constable burst into the workshop, his breathing ragged from urgent haste. "Message from the Tregarran residence, sir. The butler reports a broken gas fixture in the rear corridor and the distinct scent of lamp oil. An overturned lantern was discovered near Miss Marple's chamber, its wick deliberately removed." Holmes was already moving toward the stairs, his coat billowing behind him like dark wings. "Aldrich has initiated his contingency plan. Come, Watson. Inspector, leave sufficient men to secure the prisoners and bring the remainder with all possible speed. Our drama moves to its final scene, and we must arrive before the curtain falls forever." Our hansom raced through London's fog-cleared streets with desperate urgency, the driver responding to Holmes's clipped instructions and the promise of double fare by pushing his horse to dangerous speeds. The constables following in their police wagon maintained close formation, their lanterns creating a procession of light through the midnight darkness that seemed to part reluctantly before our headlong progress. Holmes sat forward with that coiled intensity I had learned to recognize as the prelude to his most crucial interventions. Watson, observe how Aldrich has orchestrated this final deception with theatrical precision. The broken gas fixture provides perfect cover for introducing volatile compounds, while the overturned lantern creates an obvious ignition source that will appear completely accidental to any subsequent investigation. The Tregaron townhouse emerged from the shadows like a Georgian monument, its elegant facade marred by an ominous darkness shrouding the rear quarters. Even from the street, the distinctive sharp scent of escaping gas mixed with something far more sinister carried on the night air. Holmes was descending from our hansom before the wheels had fully stopped, his keen senses already cataloguing the evidence of Aldrich's handiwork. Lord Tregaron's butler opened the front door immediately, his normally composed demeanor showing considerable strain. "Mr. Holmes, thank Providence you have arrived. His lordship and Miss Marple are in the front drawing-room under guard, but we dare not approach the rear quarters. The constables you posted report the gas concentration has reached dangerous levels, and there have been sounds of movement in the upper corridors." Holmes moved immediately toward the house's interior, producing dampened handkerchiefs for both of us as protection against the increasingly toxic atmosphere. The petroleum distillate has been adulterated with chemical compounds designed not merely to burn, but to explode with sufficient force to destroy all evidence of artificial origin. We proceeded through the elegant hallway toward the drawing-room, where Lord Tregaron waited beside his granddaughter with barely contained anxiety. Miss Marple appeared markedly more alert than during our previous encounters, her beautiful eyes showing signs of returning clarity as the chemical influence gradually diminished. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice carrying that musical quality inherited from her Burmese grandmother, "I've been remembering fragments of my father's work. He discovered systematic irregularities in the cataloguing of confiscated treasures, sophisticated forgeries being substituted before official documentation. He spoke of specific individuals within the colonial office who were facilitating these substitutions across the entire empire." Holmes knelt beside her chair, his expression grave with the implications. "Your memories are returning naturally as Dr. Pemberton's compounds lose their hold. What else do you recall?" "Names, sir. Detailed records my father kept of discrepancies that troubled his conscience. He was preparing a comprehensive report when he died in what appeared to be an accidental fall, but which I now understand was carefully orchestrated murder." A sudden crash echoed from the floors above, followed by the sharp sound of splintering wood and the petroleum scent growing noticeably stronger. Holmes immediately gestured for the constables to position themselves at strategic points while he examined the gas fixtures in the drawing-room. "Aldrich has selectively disabled portions of your gas supply while maintaining others, creating precisely the conditions he requires," Holmes explained to Lord Tregaron. "He possesses intimate knowledge of theatrical lighting systems, which translates readily to domestic installations." We ascended the elegant staircase with extreme caution, the petroleum vapors growing overwhelming as we approached the upper landing. Holmes moved with the methodical precision of someone who understood exactly what dangers we faced, testing each step and examining every fixture for signs of tampering. The rear corridor stretched before us in a haze of toxic vapor, the broken gas fixture hissing audibly, while an overturned lantern lay precisely positioned on the polished floor, its wick deliberately removed to prevent premature ignition. Holmes knelt beside the lantern, his magnifying glass revealing fine wire traces leading toward the skirting board. "A timing mechanism," he murmured, following the nearly invisible wires to a small hole drilled through the baseboard. "Spring-loaded flint striker designed to activate when the gas concentration reaches optimal levels. Ingenious and deadly." With surgical precision, Holmes severed the trigger wire and carefully extracted the concealed mechanism, rendering it harmless. We then proceeded toward Miss Marple's chamber, where the door stood slightly ajar, and the sound of labored breathing suggested we had arrived at the crucial moment. Aldrich knelt beside the unconscious form of Miss Marple, his usual affable demeanor replaced by cold calculation as he positioned what appeared to be smelling salts beneath her nose. Holmes's sharp eyes immediately recognized the deception. Not smelling salts, Watson, but concentrated chloroform designed to ensure she never regains consciousness. Step away from the lady, Mr. Aldrich. The lighting master spun toward us with desperate fury, producing a small revolver from his coat. You're too late, Holmes. The girl's testimony dies with her, and the colonial irregularities remain buried forever. But Holmes had anticipated such desperation. As Aldrich raised his weapon, my friend struck with the swift precision of his baritsu training, sending the revolver clattering across the floor while simultaneously tackling our adversary to the ground. The struggle was brief but intense, ending only when Lestrade and his constables burst through the doorway, having approached through the garden windows. Within moments, Aldrich was secured in iron restraints, his elaborate conspiracy finally brought to its conclusion. I immediately attended to Miss Marple, whose pulse was weak but steady. The fresh air from the opened windows gradually restored her breathing to normal rhythm, and her eyes fluttered open with returning awareness. "The star," she whispered. Then, with growing clarity, "No, that was the dream they gave me. I remember now, Mr. Holmes. I remember everything about my father's discoveries and the men who killed him to keep their secrets." Holmes stood beside the captured Aldrich, his gray eyes reflecting both satisfaction and grim determination. "The immediate danger is past, Watson, but the full scope of this conspiracy demands complete exposure. Tomorrow we shall ensure that justice reaches every participant in this elaborate deception, from the theatrical accomplices to the colonial office officials who orchestrated 15 years of systematic theft." As the toxic vapors cleared from the Tregaron residence and Miss Marple's memories continued their natural restoration, I realized we had not merely solved a case of jewel theft, but uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of the Empire's administration. The shattered star had indeed illuminated far more than anyone could have anticipated. The following morning found our Baker Street sitting room transformed into an impromptu courtroom of justice, where Holmes had assembled all the principal figures of our extraordinary case. Lord Tregaron sat beside his granddaughter, whose restored memories had brought not only clarity to her beautiful eyes, but a steel-like determination that spoke eloquently of her father's blood. Inspector Lestrade occupied his customary chair, while the accumulated evidence of our investigation lay arranged with characteristic precision across Holmes's desk, like the components of some intricate clockwork finally assembled into working order. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holmes began, his gray eyes surveying each face with the satisfaction of a conductor preparing to direct his orchestra's finest performance, "the case of Miss Marple and the star that shattered in her hands represents perhaps the most sophisticated theatrical deception I have encountered in my professional career. What appeared to be simple jewel theft was, in reality, the desperate final act of a criminal conspiracy that had been systematically looting the Empire's colonial treasures for over 15 years. He moved to his chemical bench, where he had prepared a small demonstration using the bronze sleeve we had recovered from Aldrich's lodgings. The true genius of this conspiracy lay not in its criminal audacity, but in its theatrical precision. Observe this bronze casing, scorched along one edge and bearing traces of verdigris. It was designed to fit precisely within the lime cylinder of a theatrical spotlight, creating a heat-resistant compartment accessible only from the rear of the apparatus. Holmes demonstrated the mechanism with practiced ease, showing how the genuine sapphire could be concealed within the heated lime while remaining protected from the intense temperatures. Mr. Aldrich, as lighting master, had only to replace the spent cylinder after each performance to carry away whatever treasures had been temporarily stored within his ingenious hiding place. The bronze filings discovered in Grimsby's workshop were deliberately planted to misdirect our investigation, while the verdigris traces on the platform rail marked the only location where such substitutions could occur unobserved. Miss Marple leaned forward, her recovered memories providing crucial context to Holmes's technical exposition. My father discovered that authentic artifacts were being systematically replaced with sophisticated forgeries before official cataloging, creating dual inventories where genuine treasures disappeared into private collections, while the Empire's records showed only replicas. Precisely, Miss Marple, Holmes continued, producing 3 objects from his evidence collection: a chamois bag, fragments of blue glass, and the modified star setting. The conspiracy required not one deception, but 3 separate sapphires, each crafted for a specific purpose within the elaborate performance. He opened the chamois bag with reverent care, revealing a stone of such magnificent depth and fire that even Lestrade drew a sharp breath. The genuine Tregoron sapphire, recovered from Ashford's lodgings where it had been concealed within a false-bottomed lantern case. "This is the stone your father wore into battle, Lord Tregoron, and which your granddaughter remembered from childhood as the star that sings." The first forgery, Holmes continued, indicating a collection of sophisticated fragments, was the superior replica that deceived even Mr. Blackwood's expert authentication. Marcus Ashford, operating under the theatrical identity of Silas Venn, had examined the original years before when creating insurance replicas, and his criminal genius lay in recognizing that the most effective theft occurs when the victim never realizes anything has been stolen. Holmes lifted the star setting, demonstrating the hidden compartment's operation with a thin probe. The second forgery was this fragile glass shell, chemically treated with copper salts and shellac to simulate internal fire while being designed to collapse under specific heat conditions. The medieval setting's hidden compartment, originally intended for concealing poison or messages, provided the perfect delivery system for the chemical compounds that created the spectacular disintegration. "But surely," I interjected, "the timing required extraordinary precision to ensure the collapse occurred at the precise dramatic moment." "Indeed, Watson. Mr. Aldrich's expertise with theatrical lighting systems allowed him to calculate exactly the temperature and duration required to trigger the predetermined failure. The copper compounds not only created the distinctive blue luminescence that simulated a genuine sapphire's internal structure, but also provided the chemical signature we discovered throughout the theater. Dr. Pemberton's role in this elaborate deception proved equally calculated. Holmes explained how the disgraced physician had been manipulated through his desperate financial circumstances into administering compounds that created not unconsciousness, but heightened suggestibility. Miss Marple was made to believe she had been injured by glass fragments that never broke her skin, that she experienced pain existing only in chemically induced hallucination. Her apparent disappearance through the dressing room window was orchestrated while she remained in this vulnerable state, convinced she was escaping dangers that existed only in her manipulated perceptions. Lord Tregoron's voice carried the weight of 15 years of grief when he spoke. "Then my son's death in India was no accident. He was murdered to prevent exposure of this network." Captain Tregoron's investigations threatened powerful interests that extended into the highest levels of colonial administration, Holmes confirmed gravely. The ledger recovered from Ashford's workshop documents systematic theft involving colonial office administrators, shipping agents, customs officials, and private collectors across the entire empire. The financial scope reaches hundreds of thousands of pounds, while the cultural significance of the stolen artifacts is beyond calculation. Miss Marple rose with quiet dignity, her musical voice carrying undertones of steel that spoke of recovered strength and purpose. "Mr. Holmes, my father's original investigation notes remain hidden within my personal effects at the mission school. With my memories restored, I can provide detailed testimony regarding the specific irregularities he discovered and the threats he received before his convenient accident." Holmes regarded her with the respect due a fellow investigator who had endured chemical torture while maintaining her essential integrity. "Your courage in recovering authentic memories despite systematic manipulation has ensured that your father's work will finally receive the recognition it deserves, Miss Marple. Truth possesses a remarkable capacity for restoration when artificial barriers are removed. Inspector Lestrade consulted his official notebook with evident satisfaction. Ashford, Aldrich, and Pemberton are securely confined pending trial. The Colonial Office has initiated internal investigations based on your evidence, Mr. Holmes, and several prominent collectors have found their recent acquisitions subject to uncomfortable scrutiny. As our gathering began to disperse, Holmes moved to stand before the fireplace, his lean figure silhouetted against the dancing flames in that characteristic pose I had witnessed countless times. This case has reminded me, Watson, why human nature provides an inexhaustible source of both fascination and instruction. The same intelligence capable of creating such elaborate deception also possesses the capacity for remarkable resilience and ultimate triumph over artificial manipulation. He reached for his violin, drawing the bow across the strings in a melody that seemed to capture both the melancholy of past injustices and the satisfaction of present resolution. The theatre, Watson, serves as society's mirror, reflecting our collective delusions and aspirations. Our friends behind the curtain merely took the lesson too literally, forgetting that authentic human connections possess a strength no chemical compound or theatrical deception can permanently destroy. When the last notes faded into the comfortable silence of our sitting room, I found myself contemplating how best to chronicle this extraordinary adventure for posterity. The fog had finally lifted completely from London's streets, and through our windows the city appeared refreshed and renewed, much like the spirits of those who had endured this elaborate conspiracy and emerged with their integrity intact. "The case is concluded, Watson," Holmes observed with that faint smile indicating his thoughts had already begun to turn elsewhere. "Though I suspect the reverberations will continue for some time through certain corridors of power. Truth, once unleashed, possesses its own inexorable momentum." As I settled into my familiar chair to begin recording these events, I reflected that the case of Miss Marple and the star that shattered in her hands would stand as testament not merely to Holmes's deductive brilliance, but to the fundamental principle that authentic memory and genuine human connection ultimately prove stronger than any artificial manipulation, however sophisticated its design.